So when we're making sure that we are securing the network, we are actually saving lives.
Until you mentioned it about this being potentially life-saving, I had never actually considered the importance of it to that level.
I think it really gives me a mission to work towards.
So on this topic of zero trust, I'm really curious what you found would be needing special attention.
When you're transmitting data from one device to the other, what if it gets into the bad hands? What happens?
First get stuff to work, and then the next step is, well, let's get it optimized to work better, and then the third step is, well, let's secure it.
But at the end of the day, what should motivate us is just doing the right thing at the right time.
Any one line of code that is messed up can bring down internet for 1.4 billion Windows devices.
It's a very tricky thing to navigate, and it requires the full depth of experience.
Deep in the digital shadows, where threats hide behind any random byte, a fearless crew of cybersecurity warriors guards the line between chaos and order. Their epic battles, rarely spoken of until today. Welcome to the Defender's Log, where we crack open the secrets of top security chiefs, CISOs, and architects who faced the abyss and won. Here's your host, David Redekop.
Welcome back to the Defender's Log. I am so enthusiastic to have Aditi Patange today from Microsoft, as well as Francois right here from ADAMnetworks. And so it's going to be a three-way version of the Defender's Log today. Welcome, Francois. Welcome, Aditi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So on this podcast, I really enjoy speaking and interviewing folks who live in the Defender space. And we've had some really cool guests. Aditi, the reason we asked you to come on here is because we got to know you at Microsoft. In fact, we met at RSA regarding Microsoft Zero Trust DNS. And this is an exciting space, obviously, for all of us, but really would like to just start today by having a little bit of background on you. Who is Aditi?
Thank you for the space, David. I'm really happy and excited to be here with you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and Francois and hear about the awesome, cool things that you're doing, how we can collaborate to kind of defend this space like you talk about in your previous blogs. It is really a defender's place. So I'm really excited to kind of learn more, work with people, and really feel honored to be here with you to talk about this. A little bit background on myself. I am a DT. I did my bachelor's in computer engineering. I've always been excited about computers and how they work, programming. I used to be a software engineer before.
Yeah, so let's do a little bit more of the human element here. Aditi, so why is it that you got into technology? What was the first time that you realized, hey, there's a future for me, and it somehow involved ones and zeros?
Wow, I wish there was a very good story for this, but both of my parents are computer scientists. So I grew up in a household where both of my parents are writing code. And as soon as my school started offering a CS class, they're like, you should sign up for this. I come from an Indian family where the only two career options are either you become a doctor or you become an engineer. Those are the only two options we ever get. And I don't think I'm being cut out for a doctor. So engineer it was. And when I took my first CS class, it was mind blowing. It was nice. We started out with assembly. And just seeing that assembly code being put out, it actually does edit some bits, and then you see something do an addition on a machine, you see it subtract some things, even those basic things. Working with those processors was exciting. I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I started writing in C++, and that was great. But then when I moved to Python, it's like, wow, this is mind-blowing. I can do so many more things with such little code. Throughout that, I think somewhere I just fell in love with it before realizing that I am in love with it.
Right, and so at what stage did you become a defender? I mean, you're sitting in smack bang in the middle of probably one of the most powerful security aspects ever added to Windows. You're sitting smack bang in the middle of this. At what stage did your life take a turn for you to end up right in the middle of the core of what could be security for Windows, for the Windows world.
I do have to say a lot of it was definitely luck. When I was trying to switch roles and become a product manager, this happened to be the first role that I interviewed for. I spoke to Tommy Jensen, who was my first interviewer, later became my mentor, good friend, and he really sold me on it. Even within our first interview, he was help me understand the importance of networking. He spoke about Zero Trust DNS and what it does. I was like, okay, this sounds cool. This seems interesting. This seems important. I always knew that I wanted to work on something important. For me, it's very important to understand the why behind something. If I don't understand the why behind something, I'm not as motivated to work on it. And I think he did a phenomenal job on selling me on it when I got, but still, it's like, how much do you really know about a position when you're interviewing? And when I got here, I thanked my stars that I landed in this place. Fairly recently, it's been a few years, but still feels very recent. I've transitioned into product management, and that was also the time when I ventured into the space of cybersecurity and network security. And I started just learning so much more about it. It has been exciting. I really like this space because I think it really gives me a mission to work towards. There's so everything in this world is getting to a digital space. You talk to any governments, you talk to enterprises, everybody wants to go digital. But when you keep someone's data in a data center, when you're transmitting data from one device to the other, what if it gets into the bad hands? What happens? And there was this one realization one day that my mentor, Tommy Jensen, who you interviewed previously, gave me this analogy that really made me think about how important this work is. He told me that think about a hospital, and if networks go down in a hospital, how bad could that be? So when we're making sure that we are securing the networks, we're making sure that they function, we are actually saving lives. And we don't know that, but we are.
I really agree with that. It's really cool to hear that you have sort of like a similar thing that gets you up out of bed in the morning to say, actually, I get to do something that really affects people out in the real world, you know?
I have honestly, until you mentioned it about this being a potentially life-saving, I had never actually considered the importance of it to that level, but you're not wrong. I think to a part, we've lived in this space where when you apply zero trust in the real world, at first you break more things than you than you prevent from breaking. And that's not to say that it's not worth it, because sometimes things have to get momentarily worse to get better. It's not to say that you can't deploy zero trust in a smart rollout way where it's planned and where everything works. But the early versions of it certainly did that. And actually, that would be a good segue into that. So on this topic of zero trust, I'm really curious what you found would be needing special attention because it broke things.
A lot of things break. So I think the first thing that came to our mind when we were testing out Zero Trust DNS, so I think a lot of people hearing this may not be familiar with it. So kind of diving into Zero Trust DNS, the feature I work on slightly a bit more before I dive into what broke. So Zero Trust DNS would be a new feature within Windows 11 that would be an enterprise security feature which blocks all outbound connections by default. And it only allows connections that were resolved by your trusted DNS server or stuff that was explicitly configured as trusted or allowed by your IT admin. So when we do something like this, we're inherently relying on DNS resolutions as being the point of discovery for any given endpoint. What we learned in the process was a lot of legacy applications shoot straight by IP address connections. We're like, why? And those are the first ones that broke. There were many others that were using host files to discover IP addresses. And as a part of CTDN's design, we wanted to make it very transparent, very secure. So we said, yeah, no, we don't look at host files. You can't do that anymore. And people are like, are you serious? So those were some things we saw breaking, but also we were very happy with it. It was nice that all of those legacy applications were brought up to the surface, people had a chance to review them and modernize them in a way that they work well in our new networks and they're more secure. So I think breaking sometimes can be good. Like you said, it's good to break before it needs to break before it becomes better.
Amazing is that with you guys as being with Microsoft is that someone actually listens. When you actually say, guys, this is a better way of doing things. This is the old way. Let's move up to the next one. That they actually listen to you, and I think that's another really cool aspect. David.
Yeah, no, there's no question that you have a strong voice. You have, as part of your company, you have a good voice because you have the right reasons for doing this. And thank you for reminding us all what Zero Trust DNS is about and where that differs from our solution, which runs at the gateway, our flagship product, is that it actually is complementary.
Yep.
In so much as that Windows endpoint, that Windows 11 with Zero Trust DNS might be roaming from one location to another. So that protection travels with it without the need of a VPN. But I love the fact that you chose on purpose to not honor the host's file or any other source, because the whole concept of Zero Trust is that there is one source of truth. And if that means that an attacker that may attempt to modify the local host file now has that avenue neutered, I mean, that is wonderful. That is a good thing. I can also see how a lot of application vendors or even end users or lazy IT admins might not have liked that, because now their Band-Aid is effectively ripped off. Now it hurts. Now it's bleeding. Like, what do I do about this? And our answer is, well, let it heal properly so that you don't need a Band-Aid anymore. And that approach, I'm sure you've had a few conversations with folks around that. Did you have anybody that remained resistant at all?
I find people usually in two extremes of the spectrum. I find people who really care about security and who are all in on the zero trust game. So they're like, oh, wow, you don't look at host files anymore. That is great. That's one less thing for me to worry about and one less attack vector that I have to consider in my zero trust architecture. And then there are others who would, like you said, be concerned about host files. But then those people are already even just using port 53 DNS. So they haven't even moved on to encrypted DNS, and then Zero Trust DNS would be a step beyond that. So for them, it's very, very early in the journey. And they probably haven't even thought about it enough to have such set of questions.
Yeah, I could see that, because what you're actually doing with Zero Trust DNS is you are taking a number of security posture steps all at once. It's like, you've got this staircase ahead of you. At the top, it's more security. At the bottom is your current state. And then you got to basically be really, very, very tall, have very long legs, or be very agile so that you can take all those steps at the same time, right? That's what it's like what you're doing.
Yeah.
And someone has to be enthusiastic, or someone has to be forced in order to do that today. But I think as time goes on, and as attacks continue to happen, and as I suspect you guys are probably doing the same thing that we're doing, every time we see a well-publicized attack, we're like, well, how would we have prevented that? Mm-hmm. You're probably doing the same thing. In fact, it's one of my favorite times of the week when I look at all of the links that we post in, we have a Breach Watch internal channel where we post things that surface on the news. It's like, yep, would have prevented it there. Yep, would have prevented it there. That attack chain only had 3 steps, but guess what? The second step, this would have been prevented. That one had 18 steps, and we would have prevented in the first step, right? Like, it's really neat when you can analyze that. Is there been any one particular one that's been well publicized that you've been looked at, like, shaking your head?
Especially at Microsoft, because just sheer the size of the company, it's so big that our teams are disconnected from the threat intel teams who are more into the weeds of this. For our team, it's every time I come across a phishing attack, I would say that is very exciting to me, where it's like, oh yeah, if I had this phishing email with ZTDNS enabled on my device, the link wouldn't have worked because yes, the straight IP address connection would be blocked, or my server would know that, oh, it's not supposed to resolve this name, and this attack would have been prevented. So I think phishing is always one that gets me. I'm like, I can't believe even in today's world with all of the tools we have, so much of that happening. And I always see phishing as the first gateway for people to get into your machine and then kind of broaden your reach within your environment, deepen it. So I always look at that as the first step. And it's very nice to see that, yeah, we could have prevented it. Only if you start using us and start thinking about security. But yeah.
So I'm very curious if you had the same experience that we had, as when you sit down with the CISO and you tell them, "Hey, we solved phishing." What did their faces look like? What did you see when you told them that?
Like, oh, okay. Can you tell me more? And what is always funny is because the concept of zero trust DNS, like we can explain it in 2 or 3 sentences, which is not too difficult. It's very easy to understand and grasp. The beauty of the solution is that it's so simple. And even a CISO who may not be very into networking, who may not have a very deep knowledge of networking, is able to understand that. Whereas I've seen many other solutions out there in the market which sound so complex. It sounds like a bunch of marketing jargon put together, but it doesn't decode and you don't really know it. It feels like a black box. So in my conversations with CISO, it has been so effective because they're able to understand what we are doing under the hood. And that really helps me earn their trust.
Yeah, that's good.
I can't forget this episode where we were at Billington. Do you remember, Francois?
Yeah.
And we met Sammy
Right.
Curry there. And he basically gave us, 30 seconds? He says, give me 30 seconds.
Sure.
That's how much time I have. And I explained to him, don't talk to strangers, the Zero Trust DNS approach at the gateway. And by the way, he's with the Government of Canada. He's a senior official for cybersecurity. He knows his space and he holds a position of authority. So it was really important for us to register deeply. And his response was this, Aditi. He says, it's so simple. It's so elegant. Why doesn't everybody do this? Right?
Exactly.
And that is the typical response that we get over and over again from people who have that light switch turned on for them. And then somehow after that, it still ends up being that there's a voice in them that says, but wait a minute, we would be seeing this everywhere by now if this was real, right? And so we're still dealing with, we're at that phase, I think, at the moment when a new product, a new idea comes to market. But when your competition, so to speak, is, but we've always done it this way, gets in the way, it takes time. It takes momentum of people that have a strong bag of evidence to say, well, here it is. And slowly but surely, the decisions are being made in that direction. Tell us about what the motivation was to begin with by Microsoft to do this, or yourself.
That's a great question. So this effort was actually started back in 2021, I want to say, by my mentor, Tommy Jensen, who is actually the main person behind Zero Trust DNS. It was his idea. And it started with the US government's executive order on cybersecurity. They were really keen on trying to secure their government networks. It was kind of vague, and following up in 2022, more prescriptive guidance around what is expected from DNS came out as a part of M2209. Mm-hmm. Since then, our team kept talking with CISA and trying to clarify the requirements, and it turned out they wanted to do a couple of things. They wanted to make sure that all of the DNS traffic within their agency was encrypted. 2, they wanted to make sure that there was an authoritative log maintained somewhere about all of the resolutions that are being made, about what connections are allowed and what are blocked on the device. They wanted to do domain name-based segmentation. So they wanted to decide whether a given domain name was supposed to be, connections to that were supposed to be allowed or blocked. And they wanted to do all of this without TLS termination. That was the interesting bit, because until then, back in 2022, when we research across, okay, is there any existing solution that can give them all of this at what they're requiring? And the answer turned out to be no. So that kind of led to the genesis of Zero Trust DNS. Every solution we could find of at that point did the first three things by terminating TLS. So that's kind of where we had to really sit down, think about it. And that led to the birth of Zero Trust DNS. A lot of enterprise agents, so it started with US government, but then a lot of enterprises also started seeing value in this because, like you said, David, it's simple, it's elegant, and because it is baked right into Windows, it is something that doesn't even require them to install any net new agents or have something that they need to manually externally configure with a third party. So it's all integrated into the operating system. But that did come with its own set of questions. We're like, okay, we like this idea, but it only works on Windows. And we have other devices. We have Apple's, we have Google devices. What do we do with those? And because we built it for Windows, we didn't have a good answer for that. Speaking with you, it was always great to know, hey, maybe if they couple that with Don't Talk to Strangers, then they can have this level of protection across their fleet, and they don't have to worry about fragmenting their fleet where only their Windows devices
Right.
are secure and then everything else is just like kind of up in the air.
I want to go back a little bit. Like, why do you think it was such a big issue for them to not have TLS termination? Was there anything that they actually said? I mean, we have our own opinions about that, pretty strong ones. But from the government side, did they actually quantify or actually give a rationale for why that mandate?
I can aggregate a bunch of different conversations that I had over a period on that. And it all comes down to this point where if you're terminating TLS connections on one node within your deployment, that is not the actual endpoint, either the source or the destination, then you're essentially creating a honeypot situation where for an attacker,
Yes.
if they compromise that one node, they know absolutely everything that is happening in your network.
We call that a hyper valuable target, not just a valuable target, a hyper valuable target, because everything's sitting in one spot. Yeah,
Yes.
right. Wow.
So that was something I learned, and it makes perfect sense. It's sad that I see so many solutions still doing that. And even though at a policy level, people are able to understand it, at a practical level, it is becoming very difficult because a lot of IT admins don't want to move away from it. As you said earlier, they're conditioned to this is how things have been done. They are used to having visibility at the network parameter, and people are still believe in parameter security. So it's kind of a mindset shift that needs to happen. They need to see the value in the solution. They need to be more open to the new threats that we're seeing these days and how they can prevent themselves against it. So I think it's more of a mindset issue than a technology, because right now we have Zero Trust DNS, we have Don't Talk to Strangers. So we have the technology. We just need that mindset to show.
And with that mindset, that describes why there is so much inertia in the old way of doing things, right? So yeah, we're with you in the same place. Now, of course, that ends up being a competitive situation right now, because if a vendor has always relied on that being the mechanism and they just want to continue that, it's kind of understandable if it's a commercial motivation. But at the end of the day, what should motivate us is just doing the right thing at the right time. Maybe before Edward Snowden days, this was not as well known, but anybody who knows what happened since Edward Snowden is aware that the stuff in transit is vulnerable. So TLS termination is of concern to all of us. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Have you had any particular instances where you saw an additional value of doing Zero Trust DNS that you hadn't considered before? Do you have any stories like that? It's like, oh, wow, it fixes that too, or that anything like that?
I'm pretty sure that some of the big techs may not like this answer, but when I used ZTDNS and I set my trusted DNS server as an ad blocking server, my searches became so beautiful. It's like, no ads? Are you really kidding me? I didn't think of it. For me, Zero Trust DNS always came with a security value. And yeah, it's like, oh wow, ad blocking. It could be a feature.
Francois and I both have strong opinions on that too. And that most definitely is a value add that we also experienced, is just experiencing the web cleaner. And my justification for it is, if you're doing first party ads, no problem. I'll happy look at it. But if you're bringing in something from the third party, thanks, but no thanks. I don't know if you've seen this before too, but one of the aspects that was solved not by design, but by design accidentally, I guess, is things like peer-to-peer networking, right? Which has its value and has its place.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've needed to download a new ISO, and of course, torrenting it is my first go-to because it's the fastest. But then it's like some technology, as cool as the innovation is, when it gets used more by bad guys than good guys, then you start questioning the overall value. And so that was one of the byproducts for us, was that, pesky P2P that otherwise was difficult to block, especially if it started using TCP port 443. And so that was a really cool byproduct. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Francois?
Well, I think Aditi and I will do a whole separate deep dive into all of these things, because I think the interesting thing to see here is that you start doing things from first principles because you believe it's the right way to do it, and then suddenly you realize, oh, it solved this thing, oh, it also solved that thing. I mean, when we set down on this journey, we did not necessarily take the path to say, okay, let's solve the problem of phishing, but we did. And then we didn't set out this idea of, well, how can we actually neutralize a threat before it has the ability to execute, before exfiltration can take place, before the chance of actually detecting it, you can already neutralize that threat. I don't think we set out to do that. We just went back to first principles, bit down on stuff that the industry abandoned 10 years ago, and we're still seeing the benefit of that as we go. So I think what we'll do is actually do a deep dive in, take like 5 or 7 of these topics and just unpack them, because it will really take over the whole duration of this podcast, to really dive into each of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. There's like so many things. Even when I think about Zero Trust DNS, it's like, oh wow, data exfiltration, that's going to be more difficult. Oh, it's going to be harder to talk to your C2 centers. Oh, wow, phishing, like we spoke about. There's so many things that we have made harder without actually thinking about it actively.
The interesting picture here is, David, and we've actually spoken about this a lot, is that the evolution of technology is first get stuff to work. And then the next step is, well, let's get it optimized to work better. And then the third step is, well, let's secure it. Because, think about it in the development of the car. Okay, let's get that thing to work, and then let's get it to work better. But then, hey, if I don't have locks on the car, if I don't have brakes and airbags on the car, it's going to get stolen, or it will get abused, or it would just not be there, or I can get hurt by using it. So those, I think, is the same thing as what I've gleaned from you, David, is that's really been the journey of the internet. It was just get everything to work. Let's get it to work better and be more interconnected. And now suddenly we go, well, we've created this interconnectivity, but there is no security layer to IP. And that is where Zero Trust DNS, Don't Talk to Strangers, come in, is that it's essentially a security layer for the IP protocol that was just never part of the original design. And the beautiful thing is, we don't need to change the internet to achieve that. We can do that from the endpoint or from the network side. That's the most fascinating thing to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree, 100%. If we can switch gears for just a moment, Aditi, I was wondering if you have had any experience with trying to prioritize or make it interoperate with other endpoint protection. That's a third-party MDR or your own antivirus, Windows Defender. Did you come across any challenges at all, and how did you resolve them?
Yeah, so that's on our roadmap. We're very early in our journey for Zero Trust DNS. It is still in public preview. And we are excited about expanding, integrating with different solutions. So you mentioned MDR. We are thinking about getting it integrated with different SIEMs so that you can have aggregated logs and intelligence in one place. We want to make sure that SASEs are very popular solutions that people are continuing to use. VPNs are going away, but SASEs are coming in. So we want to make sure that if people use that with ZTDNs, that works. So we have a long list of items on our radar, but we have very limited funding to make that happen. So at least in the initial V1 design that we have, those are out of scope, but definitely something that keeps me up at night. And I want to make sure that it works, because without all of those integrations, it's going to feel like a standalone feature that works in its own silo. But to actually function in an enterprise setting, it needs to be able to integrate with existing solutions that IT admins are using to monitor and, yeah, probably monitor and observe things happening in their networks. So that is definitely on my radar. So one day, hopefully soon.
That's really cool. I'm also very interested in finding out if this is, since it's natively in Windows, what the future looks like in terms of it needing to be driver based. Maybe you can comment on that, because of how traditionally antivirus needed to be hooked so deeply into the kernel. It fundamentally made the Windows stack vulnerable to third-party mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And we've seen this at global scale. This in any way reduce that need for that hook, or is there that same deep-level kernel hook in place with it, or how did you handle that concern?
It is getting harder to write new kernel mode drivers in Windows, but Z2DNS is definitely implemented as using a Windows filtering platform. It is a net new kernel mode driver. So this is going all the way down to the kernel, just because of the way we need it to work and the level of granularity we need to have, and
Right.
be able to block everything that's leaving a device. And it's just difficult to do anything of that sort from the user mode. Although at Microsoft, we do have an effort where it's not a part of my team, but I am actively hearing about the migration from moving away from kernel to user mode. And that is something that we are actively working on. We're working with antivirus vendors. We are working with different providers on trying to see how we can make that happen. So you're right, that is a very active effort on trying to migrate everything to user mode. This functionality, not so much, and we haven't gotten push on trying to do that just because of the architectural design. It makes sense for it to be in the kernel, but who knows? The future can change.
And it's your own. It's not third party, right? So I know that in recent years, Microsoft holds itself up to a higher standard than it does for third parties, right? Because you don't want to have your own driver be the one that causes a crash. So yeah, no, that's completely understandable. But it's good to see all of us moving in that direction to do everything in user mode that can be done in user mode. Because ultimately, the more we close the bad actors' doors and ways of getting into our system, the safer we are. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that is so true. And internally, we have always, it's great that we have this very extensive mechanism on trying to ship code, because we have to be careful when we talk about Windows and writing any new line of Windows code, especially for something as critical as DNS. Any one line of code that is messed up can bring down internet for 1.4 billion Windows devices.
Wow.
So we have 1.4 billion devices running, and that's why there's a sense of responsibility. Like they say, with great power comes great responsibility, and our team feels that every single day. If something goes
Right.
wrong, then imagine the world coming crashing down.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
we
you
have those
cannot.
rigorous mechanisms to ensure everything we do, we have to test it out internally. It goes externally to an Windows organization is big. Microsoft is even bigger. So when all of us test it internally, it is kind of sure that, okay, we're not going to bring the world down. And then we still have lighting rings in which we slowly roll it out to the entire world. But we do make sure that whatever we write, it continues to work.
Right. But you can't not do it, because the world that's out there on the internet, it's really the universal threat ecosystem. They are busy bringing the world down. Like, it's self-destructive, like a big massive virus eating itself, right? So just leaving it means that you are essentially giving over to the risk anyway. So yeah, we really respect that, that you have to be on that edge, properly mitigating the risk internally and externally is really the name of the game.
Yeah, it makes sense that the larger the risk and the larger the user base is, the more careful you have to be with every step on along the way. I remember when we started doing things like fuzzing for testing, just to see, what can you throw at this thing that makes it crash. And so much of the world is still written in memory unsafe languages, as they call them. I know there's a lot of debate around that, especially around the really good and competent C and C++ engineers. They're like, don't take this flexibility away from me ever. And then there's the people that operate strictly at a theoretical level, like, no, you should never have a memory unsafe language used anywhere. So it's always fun to see those conversations happening and getting louder and louder. And you just slowly step away like, okay, let me see who wins this one in the end.
Yeah, it'll be very exciting to see that if we had somebody come tell me that we are going to rewrite the Windows DNS stack in Rust, I am going to really pause for a minute or two to ponder what that Herculean effort would look like. Because many of these components that we talk, even in our code, if you look, there are probably lines that were written before I was born. And many of my engineers were born who work on the team. So this is pretty old. And if we try to uproot all of that, get it into Rust, it would be, I think that would also be a good modernizing and cleanup effort for us, but also it'd just be so Herculean.
Well, given the fact that you still regularly see calls for experienced COBOL programmers, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Where your C and C++ libraries get replaced. Certainly not ones that are rooted that deeply, because honestly, it just takes time and really hard beating at software over a long period of time in order to validate, how durable, how resilient it is. And so it's a careful evaluation. But you can always tell when a junior executive makes a quick decision without adequate consideration, and then they end up having to roll back to, the original code base. It is not an easy problem to solve. So I am not giddy over anyone facing that technology debt problem. But ultimately, all of us are in a position where we have to be responsible for what we produce, and we have to be responsible for the end result, right? So it's a very tricky thing to navigate, and it requires the full depth of experience, or at the very least, team members that have the in-depth experience, get feedback from everybody, knowing that everybody is only a domain expert in a certain space. Yep. We both know people that have a very broad domain expertise. But in the end, I find that it is really essential to understand your own limitations, but it's even more important to understand the limitations of others in order to be able to make proper decisions around the future. So, Aditi, I think you've got a really good, solid grasp on the heavy dependency on legacy code that now needs to be modified to deliver new, modern functionality. And thank goodness for the ever-increasing horsepower we get in our computers, so we can just throw more stuff on top of the old stuff. As long as the old stuff works, there's no problem with it, right?
Yeah.
So that was my rant, for no particular reason, around the complexity of managing software. It's not for the faint of heart. This is not something I wish upon anybody that just says, I want to write. Our youngest says, Dad, I think I'm the one that's going to go after you, because he's heard me talk about how none of our other children have any interest in software of any kind. And he's like, Dad, I'll come along. Like, he feels like he's going to come and rescue me. Like, are you sure? Because it requires real sense of dedication, a real sense of commitment to a mission and a cause to handle that kind of depth. So I don't know how you feel about that, IDT.
Yeah. Software management is difficult, but absolutely essential. I feel the same about networking. I feel the same about security. Like I think these people nowadays, I feel they talk about AI, and that's the big flashy thing that feels like the glamorous things. But I think somewhere deep down, people are not valuing the infrastructure that enables this next generation technology to function. Our foundational infrastructures like networks, storage, basic software deployment, if none of those are functioning, then you cannot think about any frontier models. You cannot think about Gen AI. None of that is coming if this doesn't happen. So having that love for foundations and getting those fundamentals right is still as critical as it was 10 years ago.
Absolutely. So, David, quick question. Do you think we could diverge a little bit to do a bit more personal discovery with Aditi? Because I think we got into the technical things really quick.
We did. And you know what? If this was the first time meeting IDT, I think I would have focused more on that. But I like that idea because we had the chance to have a coffee with you. And so we did get to know you a little bit. But yes, I like the idea of us getting to know you a little bit more. So, Francois, go for it.
And now, what's the core driver for you? What's the primary aim that you are chasing with the ZTDNS team?
I think ZTDNS is probably a niche, but at a bigger scale, when I work on this team, when we think about our semester planning, next term planning, like I mentioned, the code that we write makes sure that internet works on 1.4 billion devices. My goal is to make sure that it continues working in a secure fashion on all of these devices. I think about mundane daily scenarios. When my grandma is using her laptop, I want to make sure that she is protected. And I want to make
Right.
sure that bad actors aren't trying to exploit her. They're not trying to exfiltrate her financial information. They're not trying to steal her health records. They're not trying to take over her home network. That is something that I want to make sure works. There are, with ZTDNS, it is broader. It is, we think about government agencies, and there are government agencies that have hospitals, like the Veteran Affairs, or there's the Social Security Administration that deals with all of our financial information. There are other very important critical agencies. There are other enterprises like hospitals, financial agencies, armies that have very critical data sitting on their data centers within their endpoints that are very essential, critical for the entire nation's protection. There's a lot of sensitive data sitting on there. I want to make sure that, at least within the purview of my work, I don't create any loopholes for bad actors to get in, exploit this, and put everybody at risk. And to know that my work can actually impact that, to know that my work will be able to protect people against threats, to know that anything good I do would be running at that level of scale and provide protection to my near and dear ones, my neighbors, my fellow citizens. Very heartwarming. That really keeps me going every single day.
Right.
That is awesome. That is really good to hear, Aditi. And I can't help but mention those that know how we think about data security. We often refer to sovereign data custody as a way to describe that there is no terminator in the mix, that there's no TLS termination happening on the network. And so just thank you to you and Microsoft for moving the needle on forward properly on sovereign data custody. We think that's really important for all humans on Earth to be able to enjoy more privacy, more security, and to have none of that in the hands of third parties. That's fundamental in what you do and fundamental in what we do. And so from that point of view, it's been a real pleasure working with you and collaborating with you. And we look forward to a bright future where we can bring this to others. Is there any one message that IDT would like the world to know?
Yes, I'm very curious to hear.
Wow, that's a tough question. I would say that I want the world to not take infrastructure for granted. I want them to understand that the fundamentals are something. So when we build a house, we really secure the foundation of the house. So our network is that foundation. When we think about flashy technologies, let's not forget about that foundation. Let's make sure that the foundation is still solid, that it works, it's secure, because otherwise anything you build on top of it is just going to come crashing down like a house would with a weak foundation.
I love it. That rings true for us, and it should ring true for a lot of organizations, including the ones that build the fluffy stuff. Make sure that the foundation is there first, right?
And the message that you have for CISOs or defenders out there that's gonna or that needs the technology that you guys are building and maturing, what would you say to them?
Talk to me. No, but honestly, if you're using port 53 DNS, really do reconsider how you are deploying your networks today. And you're really exposing yourself to a lot of risk there with bad actors, full visibility into your network. So please do consider at least moving on to thinking about encrypted DNS. And I'm sure their first step is moving to encrypted DNS. And then once you are able to do that, then there's a wide variety of things like Zero Trust DNS, Don't Talk to Strangers that you can think about. But honestly, if you're on port 53, it's high time to move to some form of encrypted DNS.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. Aditi, thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to collaborating with you and Microsoft in the future.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me, David. It's always a pleasure talking to you and Francois. So thank you for having me. And I am also excited to see all of the new things that we can do together.
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.
The Defender's Log requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.